Solidity is an increasingly unstable condition of matter due to increasing electric pressures developed by repetitive series of explosive disturbances in inertia. The greater the disturbance, the greater the effort necessary to produce it. The greater the effort, the greater the opposition to the effort by an equal and opposite resisting pressure. The greater the resistance, the greater the heat generated by the contact of the two oppositely flowing streams. The greater the heat, the less the relative solidity for that respective pressure. The greater the incandescence, the greater the radiation of heat by expulsion. The greater the expulsion by radiation, the more solid, dense, and rigid the radiating substance. The more rigid a substance is, the more true to its own plane of pressure. The more true to plane, the more gyroscopic the motion of its particles. The more gyroscopic the motion of its particles, the more apparently stable the mass. The greater the solidity, the greater the instability, but the greater is the illusion of stability. The outgoing, ever-contacting force of the explosive actions meet each other at the north planes of opposition, and rebound toward the south planes of inertia, ever expanding as they rebound. Man lives and thinks in terms of solidity because he is accustomed to the environment of his own present potential. Solidity is something which we can see, feel, weigh, and command. It is difficult for man to comprehend that his dependable solids are but contracting or expanding gyroscopically held in apparent suspense for a sufficient length of time to create the deceptive illusion of permanence. If man would picture the evolution and devolution of entire solar systems as mere flashings of fireflies in the meadow, he would form a better concept of the instability of solidity. The process of one is exactly the same as that of the other. Every effect produced during the 10 billion trillion years of the one is exactly repeated in the 1 second of the other. Solidity is therefore but an effect of general-active, contractive pressure. Like all effects of motion, it is periodic, and its tones are in conformity with the formula of the locked potentials. Like all effects of motion, its opposite and equal balancing effect increases its resistance to accumulation as accumulation increases. Greater positive charge opposed to greater negative discharge means greater potential. Greater potential means greater pressure opposition. Greater pressure opposition means higher melting point, less volume, and greater density. A metal which will melt at 2,000 degrees at sea level pressure of this planet will still remain a frozen solid at 200 with three sets of zeros. I don't know if that's a trillion or what. In the opposing 200 trillion in the opposing high pressures of the sun's dense crust. A radioactive emanation expelled from a low-pressure atom may not exceed 10 miles per second, while that of a high-pressure atom of the 10th octave, such as radium, will approach 186,000 miles per second. The increasing contractive electric pressures of the octaves of the elements from 0 minus minus through 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus plus are accompanied by rising melting points and lowering volumes. The decreasing expansive magnetic pressures from 4 plus plus back through 3 minus 2 minus 1 minus to 0 minus minus are accompanied by lowering melting points and greater volumes. Axial activity increases as radioactive pressures decrease. Orbital activity increases as general-active pressures increase. The entire universe is one of varying potential. Therefore, it is one of varying opposing pressures. If the entire universe of dimension is one of varying density, which means that it is more or less apparently solid everywhere, then it necessarily follows that the entire universe must be one of varying pressures. If this universe is one of varying pressures, the axiom of Euclid, there heretofore quoted, cannot be true. If that state of motion, which is called solid, is a state in which the tremendous contractive pressure of great accumulation of the energy constant has become molded into compact electric mass of high potential, then those states of motion which are called liquid and gaseous are merely the lower pressures appropriate to the slight accumulation of the energy constant into more tenuous masses. More tenuous masses freeze or melt at lower temperatures where the resistance to integration is not so intense. An active gas like hydrogen, which leaps explosively into flame from the high opposing pressures of the sun's surface at a speed of thousands of miles per minute, ascends quite leisurely in comparison and without combustion from this planet's lower pressure. Upon Uranus or Neptune, hydrogen undoubtedly exists in a free state, frozen as its prototype, Caesium, is frozen upon this earth. Upon Neptune, hydrogen undoubtedly falls of its own weight, as aluminum would fall on this planet. Nature builds tonal walls with which she divides her effects of motion. If a pressure wall is developed, it must necessarily follow that somewhere an opposite wall of resistance is set up against which that pressure can develop. This principle holds true in the apparent voids of space just as it does on this planet in a compression tank, an automobile tire, the depths of the ocean, or thousands of miles within its crust. Every pressure develops an exactly equal and opposite resisting pressure. Pressures resulting from the accumulation of mass of sufficient density to be perceptible to man would be relatively present in mass which is beyond man's perception. Man's ether of space is substance in motion, just as molten metal is matter in motion. It is, in fact, infinitely more active, even though that activity cannot be perceived by the senses of man. The evidence of it, however, can be plainly seen and accurately measured. The unseen universe is existent not alone through deduction, or as a theory, or as a logical conclusion. Every effective motion is registered in light, and all its pressure walls are visible spectroscopically, each having its own pressure line. Zeeman long since stumbled upon one evidence of the 10 octaves by sending a strong generative charge through sodium, but the significance of what he saw had no meaning for him. By thus increasing its pressure, he saw 10 yellow lines, each one of which told the story of an overtone of that particular state of motion, 1+, reproduced in a different octave. All of the 10 octaves are measurable in every dimension, even in the infra and ultra ends. Also are their waves exactly computable, and their other dimensions exactly ascertainable. The difference between any one part of space and any other is purely relative in all of its dimensions. The dimensions of the one differ from the dimensions of the others. That is all.